All right, welcome to the Ohio State of Mind. Here with me is my coworker. We're going into our second year together at Buckeyes Wire. Mark Russell. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me to be on. Excited to chat a little Buckeyes stuff here.
It's only this is my fifth episode. I've only invited you on, Mark, 5 times. So thank you for finally making it on. And you were awesome too, because I know that you said yes. I asked you late, you responded, and I didn't respond back to you with the details of what we were going to talk about for another 9 hours. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you hanging in there with me and doing this. Well, let's talk before we dive into Ohio State. There's a lot of interesting news today. Obviously, Tough Borland got cut. It's not huge news, but it's fairly interesting. I think a lot of people were surprised he made the roster in Minnesota to begin with. Obviously, Ohio State and the Notre Dame game. But before we jump into all that stuff, I want to kind of talk about you. We had Jay Stevens on the show last week, the host of Locked On Buckeyes, and he was kind of talking to me about his fandom and where that started. But what about you? I know you've been writing for Buckeyes Wire since 2018, you said?
I think it was at the end of 2018 is when we started.
But you've been a Buckeye fan for a long time, right?
As long as I can remember. I grew up just south of Columbus, 15, 20 minutes from campus. So just kind of in my blood.
So how'd you land
Scarlet and Gray.
How'd you land at Buckeyes Wire then?
So Phil, who's our editor, he and I went to college together, actually. MBNU, anybody? Mount Vernon Nazarene University. So we went to college together, and he had put something out. He's like, "Hey, I'm starting this thing, and anybody interested in talking Buckeyes?" And I was like, "Well, I love talking about the Buckeyes, and I've always thought it'd be kind of cool to be part of writing about sports and such. I like to write, and I love sports, and so." Just kind of came together, and he's like, "Hey, we're doing this thing. We're trying to get it off the ground. Let's do it and see. Give me a sample." And apparently, I fooled him enough that he thought I could write for him. So here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. Phil's an awesome dude. He's a great boss. Hopefully we can have him on the podcast eventually. The awesome thing about Mark is a lot like Jay. He also you talk basketball, you write about basketball, you're very knowledgeable about basketball. Hopefully once basketball season rolls back again, I can have you on and basically just have you talk for 30 minutes because I know nothing about basketball. Phil messaged me about one game. I think you were busy, you were coaching or something. And I was like, I don't know what to do. So it's just basically me putting together just as basic as possible, just trying to get something out of there. But let's talk about. I asked Jay his favorite Buckeyes, and obviously I think he whipped out Braxton Miller. I said, no. Let me stop you right there. I want some underrated Buckeyes, and then he whipped out a gem in Quinn Pitcock, which got us completely off track, got a different road, which I loved. So that's what I want to hear from you. Who are some of your favorite Buckeyes? Don't say like Archie Griffin or Troy Smith. Name something, somebody special to you. Somebody give me somebody. It's a good question, right?
Yeah, it is. First name that comes to my mind is obviously somebody that we well known would be Eddie George. Loved watching Eddie run.
Yeah.
And I think the guy that comes to my mind, right now, it's not Quinn Pitcock, but I loved Sean Springs when I was in college. I loved watching him play. I mean, it's just a lockdown corner.
Oh, yeah.
And the only time I was ever disappointed in him was not even his fault. It was in the Michigan game when he slipped on that cold turf and allowed Ty Streets to score that touchdown. But I loved watching him. Man.
He went on to have a hell of an NFL career too. He was in the NFL for 15 years. Was an all pro lockdown defender. Seattle Seahawks and Washington Redskins, and he was I think he was the number 3 pick that year. Orlando Pace went number 1 in '97, and was it '97 or '96? I always mess that up. It was '97, right?
Springs, I think, came out in '96, didn't he?
They got drafted together. Pace went 1, Springs went 3. So if it was '96, there you go. Yeah, because that sounds right. Because they would have been 96 because Eddie and Terry Glenn and Ricky Dudley went 90, or they were 95, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You
Another guy. Here's one for you. Popped in my head. I really liked Steve Tovar, linebacker,
yeah.
mid 90s. I really like that guy. Like I just felt like he brought it every single week. Got every ounce of ability that he had. Gave everything he had. So there you go. There's one. There's a Quinn Pittock name for you. So
Well, that's all. But he was an All-American, first-round draft pick. But Quinn Pittock, I think that it was a good answer too, because people forget how good Quinn Pittock was because his NFL career was nothing because he struggled with video game addiction. But he was another guy who's all Big Ten. He had a really, if you go back and you look at what he did in college, like, oh yeah, that guy was good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, his NFL career was just. I think we looked it up last week, and he was in the NFL for like 1 year before he had to go to rehab for depression and video game addiction and dominating the Arena Football League. Steve Tovar, that was another guy. He was drafted in the first round by the Cincinnati Bengals, like 93, 92. Was that right?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Because Big Daddy went.
I know he was early 90s.
Yeah, and he was an All-American too. I don't know really what happened to him in the NFL. I don't think he obviously did much. But yeah, those are good ones. Those linebacker cores in those early 90s too, man. When you look at all those guys, a lot of those guys were drafted in the first round, or early at least. And then you were kind of like, well, what happened to that guy? Like Alonzo Spellman I think he was in 91, and he was a defensive end, but still. Craig Powell. I wrote an article about Gabe Powers the other day where I compared him to Craig Powell, another long, fast guy who didn't really do much in the NFL. God, there's another guy that played with. I'm thinking of Lorenzo Styles. His son's at Ohio State too. Another guy that was drafted in the first couple picks. The first couple rounds, and didn't really do much in the NFL either. You got anybody else in the top of your head? I like this game.
Yeah, I know. I like to know these things ahead of time. It gives me time to think about it, but
yeah, but then it's not as spontaneous, right?
Yeah, I know.
You can overthink about it. If I bring it up in the spur of the moment, then you can just go boom. This is one
of those things. Like 5 minutes after you shut this down, I'm going to be texting you, rattling off 10 names for you.
Yeah, but then it's not fun, right? So someone.
How about this name?
Yeah,
Butler by Note.
Oh my God.
Let the Big Ten in apostrophes.
That's a good one. That's the winner. That's the winner because people don't realize how good he was. I told you, I was watching those 93 games, Pittsburgh and Washington against, was it Washington? See, they're running together in my mind. But he was getting the ball. It was that backfield. First of all, it's one of the best backfields in all college football history. Butler Binote, Raymond Harris, Eddie George, Jeff Cothran, and all those dudes went on to have pretty solid NFL careers. And Binote was getting the ball. He was getting the ball all over all of them. I mean, he was a fast dude. Then they moved him to the defensive back in the NFL. Played kick returner, punt returner. Dude was fast, explosive. Just a hell of an athlete. That's a good one. I actually got to talk to him.
I don't know if you know this or not. He is a pastor now. Do you know that?
I did not know that. I saw him. He lives up in Columbus, right?
I believe the last I had heard, he had started like a campus church on Ohio State's campus through the Nazarene Church, I believe.
I spoke to his wife and his kid, and he gave me one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But he was a cool dude. We got to talk a little bit of ball, and he was talking about playing in the XFL and how it was fun and how he wished it would have lasted longer. We talked about him playing with the Broncos. He said that the XFL was the most fun he had, which makes sense. I think he played, it was probably the league where he played the most. He said he won the Arena League. I didn't know that. He won a game. He won the Arena Cup. That's what he told me. And then I didn't know he played in the NFL Europe either, but I think he told me he won whatever they call it, the World Cup or whatever for the Barcelona Dragons or something, which was kind of cool. Very cool guy. Very cool. I like that answer. Butler by Note. That's a good one. But all right, well let's go ahead and dive in. We'll talk about we talked about Tuf Borland. Did you have anything to add about Tuf Borland, his NFL career? I
always felt like Tuf Borland got people were overly harsh on the guy because of, I feel like it was more the scheme than it was him. I mean, you can't put the guy on the Heisman Trophy winner and expect him to cover anyone.
That was rough. That was rough.
So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't mind. I would hope he would catch on with somebody else, you know, even if it's just on a practice squad or something of that nature. Yeah, John Simon got cut. I don't know if you saw that.
I did not see that. That was today too?
He got cut. That was yesterday. And then Kendall Sheffield got cut, but he signed immediately with Houston, I believe. So
that's kind of odd that he got cut too, because he was pretty solid his rookie season with the Falcons.
Yeah. So I didn't get a chance to hear the reasoning why. I just saw that it happened.
And then John Simon, he's staring down the barrel of his older. He's deep into his 30s too, so he's kind of just hanging on, trying to cash some checks, right? I mean, he's getting up there.
Yeah, what was he? 2012, 2013, somewhere. I mean, he was around Urban's first year, I think.
Yeah, I feel like
you're talking about 9 to 10 years in the league, somewhere around there, 8 to 10 years in the league. So
I feel like he was drafted the same year as Carlos Hyde, I think.
So 14.
Yeah, and Carlos Hyde's when he gets signed, I'm like, dude, just I might want to call it quits. But whatever, if you can still cash those checks and follow your dream. Tough Borland, man, I think you're a little bit more positive on than I am. That's a guy that I think we might be seeing suit up in the USFL.
He might.
You're always so positive about it. Let's talk about that. You're always so, every time we talk about Buckeyes, and I don't hate a lot of Buckeyes, but I feel like you're less critical. Who's an Ohio State player that you don't have to talk? I'm not asking you to be, completely negative about him, but who's somebody that when you watch them play, they were frustrating or you felt was a liability? Because when I think of Tough Borland, I do think of him. If you made me categorize someone as either a positive influence or a liability, there's not a question in my mind that he was a liability, right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, probably not too many. You call me a homer, I don't know, but maybe like JB Shugart. I just felt like he just, if like every other play he was being called for holding.
That's a good one.
It's not like, and he was a 5-star recruit, I believe, out of Texas. And you just think like, man, how can you be ranked that high and not figure out how to block without holding all the time? And so that probably maybe one that I would think of is like every time you get a holding call, like, gosh, not again. You gotta be kidding me. So that's the only name that comes to mind right now. I tell you one, I mean, more recently, would probably be like, and because I like the guy, and again, I think it was more a matter of scheme with Sean Wade. Like what he did his junior year was so impressive, and then they moved him outside.
Yeah,
that senior year, and you just kept like, it's there. I've seen it. Why is he not able to perform? Why is he getting just toasted all the time? Yeah. And so, I don't know, like that.
See, I don't blame him at all.
But I think that's what I was going to say. I felt like that was more. I was frustrated, but I was frustrated more with I don't know if he asked to be put outside, so maybe build his resume for the NFL, or if they just said, "No, we need to move you out there because you're the best we got." But he was tremendous in the slot, as a slot corner. But I don't know. So.
See, it's funny because the last time you and I had a similar discussion, I can't remember if it was through text or whatever it was, but the one that aggravates me the most, and it's not necessarily his fault, it's just because he's such a famous person now, is Kirk Herbstreit. Because everybody, when you talk about Ohio State, everybody goes, oh, Kirk Herbstreit. And it's like, dude, no. Kirk Herbstreit was not a good football. He should not go down. And when I walk down the street in a different state with an Ohio State hat, people shouldn't go, oh, Kirk Herbstreit. Like, there's so many other better football players that represent Ohio State football.
Yeah, but I think Kirk was certainly average to below average. But yes, I think what I love about that is like anything else. Like when I see Joey Galloway on College Gameday or College Game, scoreboard or whatever it is. Like I always look and I go, you know what? Like, I don't think Joey Galloway is the greatest analyst, but I love that he's from Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what I think about Herbstreit. Like, I think Herbstreit has great insight, and I think he does an excellent job of not being a homer, which is why I think he gets so much hate from Ohio State fans. But to me, it's a matter of the brand. Like, you go, oh, that's an Ohio State guy there. Like, you watch the NFL, you watch like the talk shows or the pregame shows, they're littered with Ohio State guys.
Yes.
Herb Street happens to be the biggest face, so it's easy to go, oh yeah, Herb Street.
I
So
know.
for me, it's not a matter of like, oh, he was a great quarterback, I loved watching him play. It's a matter of like, he's one of the best, if not the best, at what he does, and he's an
Yeah.
Ohio State guy. Like, we claim him, from that standpoint is the way I look at it. So
Yeah, it's just kind of fun. I go to a lot of memorabilia shows and stuff like that, and I collect football cards. And if you could go get, Ted Provost was a 2-time All-American, right? Art Schleicher was a Heisman finalist 3 years in a row. Troy Smith won the Heisman. You can go find their stuff for theirs, and their average card, maybe $15-$20. Dude, you'd be hard pressed to find a Kirk Herbstreit card less than $50.
Really? No,
Yeah.
that does surprise me a little bit. So.
Oh my God! If it's got Kirk Herbstreit, I don't have one. I have if you name an Butler Binoti got two. If you name an Ohio State guy that you think that that must be hard to find. Troy Smith, I bet I got 10 of his autographs. I got him on a Ravens helmet and an Ohio State helmet right next to me. Probably a stack of football cards with Troy Smith. Or same with Art Schleicher. Kirk Herbstreit, I got nothing signed by that dude. Because it's weird. It's just weird. It's odd. But let's dive into Ohio State recently announced they're playing Notre Dame in prime time. Okay, so it's gonna be at 7:30. Also, the spread came out. Have you seen the spread? Have you seen how big this thing is?
14 was the last I saw. Is that still it?
Well, maybe you're looking at a different site. I don't. What popped up for me on most sites was 13.5. But whatever, 14,
Okay.
13.5. None of the sites where I gamble, you can actually bet on the game yet. So, it's debatable, I suppose. But that's a pretty big spread, I think. But at the same time, no, that's a pretty big spread, don't you think?
Was that the Notre Dame game? I thought early on it was 7. The Michigan spread just came out and it's 14. Did you see that?
I did not see that, but I'm glad you brought that up. But that sounds right because Michigan is losing everything, and they lose their offensive coordinator. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. Ohio State is favored by 13.5 over Notre Dame by OddsShark, by Vegas Insider. Yeah, by Vegas Insider, and the Spun has them as 10.5-point favorites.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm Mr. Optimistic here, right? But I just think.
Well, that's more than optimistic. 13. I mean, I would be happy.
Yeah, but you're playing at night in Ohio Stadium, and like I think Notre Dame's offense can be okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But I don't think there's any way in the world that their defense can hang with Ohio State's offense, right? I mean, the big unknown is first game of the season. Will Jim Knowles have had time to install his system to where the guys know it, understand it, and can run it and hold a team that could be decent offensively in check? That's the great unknown, right? Because if you get into a scoring frenzy, then anything can happen. A fumble late in the game, something silly happens, and anything can happen there. But I just don't see how that offense is going to be stopped. I mean, those three, when you got Smith and Jigba coming back, and we saw what Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka are able to do. You still have Julian Fleming. Yeah, I was going to say, you still have Julian Fleming that is a great unknown because he's been hurt most of his career, but clearly all the tools are there. Like, so you play soft to protect against the pass, and then you've got the best running back in the country or one of the top 3, and we saw what Evan Pryor can do. Mayan Williams looks healthy. I mean, I just don't know where the holes are there. So,
yeah, I think you just convinced me to put money on it. To be honest with you. I was thinking it was too high because I'm thinking, but I think you make a lot of good points. And Notre Dame loses Jack Cohen. Jack Cohen was not the world's greatest quarterback, but he was average. Let's say he's average. He was an average Notre Dame. He was an average quarterback, right? He was much better with Notre Dame than he was with Wisconsin. He didn't make any mistakes. Yada yada yada. So now they're losing that, and they're going to Buckner, who's younger, who's probably going to be a little bit more prone to making mistakes. So if I'm breaking in a new defense like Ohio State is doing, I would rather open the season against a team that's breaking in a new quarterback that's going to try to find their, because Notre Dame does like to throw the ball. They lose their running back. Kyron Williams has gone to the NFL too, so their big threat is their tight end. You know what I mean? And they got some athletes on the outside. So I'm assuming that their identity is going to be more leaned into the pass. And you're going to be facing Buckner, who's going to be a new starter. I feel like that's kind of what you would rather have, rather than play a team like, I don't know, someone who's returning their quarterback, who is more well established. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Like if the Buckners are breaking in their defense against an offense that doesn't quite know what they're doing yet, or they're breaking a new quarterback, and we know that the Notre Dame defense is not going to be very good because even if they are, it's the same kind of thing where they have Ohio State's offense. They're not going to be able to stop Ohio State's offense. That's not a doubt in anybody's mind, correct?
I don't think anybody is planning. I mean, everything I've read so far, nobody thinks that Ohio State's offense can be stopped. It's a matter of, can Ohio State's defense make enough improvements to stop a high-powered offense? So that's the great unknown that you won't know until
Notre Dame might
get on the field.
Which Notre Dame might be a high-powered offense, but in week one, I think there's just too much expectation. Buckner's going to be. I mean, did he start? I don't know if he even started a game last year. He might have started one game. I know he split. There was a period where he was splitting time with Cone because he's more athletic, but I don't think he started.
Yeah, that was early. That was early though, wasn't it?
I think you're right. Yeah. So this is going to be a big shock to him to roll up in the shoe at night and have to play them.
Cone got hurt. Cone got hurt at one point in the season last year, I think, as well, didn't he?
I don't think he missed any full games though. Did he?
Right. I don't think so, but I thought he got hurt in the middle of.
He did, and that's when Buckner came in and Buckner ripped off. It might have been, and Buckner ripped off like a 60-yard touchdown run or something like that. And they're like, "Oh my God, this guy can move!" And then he threw a pick. You know what I mean? I think it was a situation like that. So I think you convinced me to put money on him. It feels like a lot of points for a team that was, because Notre Dame was good last year. Notre Dame is a good team. One can make the assumption that Marcus Freeman's going to be a good coach. Their offensive line is going to be top notch. Notre Dame is going to have one of the best offensive lines in college football. I mean, right?
Yeah, I do think it's so early that line is going to change for sure several times before we get to September 3rd. I gotta imagine, right?
For sure, but if you listen to all those betting experts like Brad Powers and all those guys, they say that they make their most money by placing bets now, because right now the theory is right now you're just trying to beat the book, right? You're trying to beat BetMGM or whoever's setting the line. The longer you wait, the more people are putting their money in it, and then you're betting not only the book, but you're betting against you and me, and who's because the spread is going to adjust based off of where the money's going to. I'm not a betting expert, obviously, or else I wouldn't be sitting in my 3-bedroom apartment. But that is the theory, my understanding of how it works. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a lot of websites that even allow you to bet on that game, because I've looked at Tipico and BetMGM. I don't see those games on there as something you can bet. So that's something to monitor. But all right, I know that you're rolling up on time here. We got like 10 minutes left. How much more time do I have with the great Mark Russell?
Yeah, 10's good. 10
minutes. All right. Once that clock hits 30, we'll start to shut it down. A listener asked me the other day, who are my top 5 wide receivers in Ohio State history? I simply can't answer it. There's just so many good wide receivers. I do think Ohio State is turning into wide receiver U. We kind of briefly talked about it before the show. Obviously, you remember Ohio State. Your wealth of knowledge and the guys you remember probably exceeds mine. Who are some names that come to the top of your list? I don't expect you to rank them. I feel like let's just kind of bounce us back and forth and talk ball.
Yeah. Chris Carter is the first name that comes to mind. Terry Glenn, David Boston.
Now, if you had to compare, I think we both are kind of in agreement that Chris Carter and Terry Glenn are kind of in that first tier, right?
Yeah, Chris Carter would be tops for me. I mean, I think obviously, I think what he did even in the short amount of time before he had to sit out. I just think some of the things that he did were just spectacular. I mean, I think he was years ahead of his time, especially at a place like Ohio State, because at that time they weren't known as a great passing team. So,
Well,
yeah, I mean,
think
what's that?
I think Gary Williams and White Lightning Doug Donnelly would beg to differ, but I see your point.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think Michael Jenkins is vastly underrated. I mean, longevity, yes,
Yeah,
but I mean some clutch plays when you think about the history of Ohio State, especially the 2002 season.
yeah.
You gotta throw Olave in there, based on what he did over 4 years.
Well, before we move on from the Terry Glenn Chris Carter conversation, it's funny that I appreciate that you're giving Chris Carter the higher rank due to the short period of time he was there. But I give Terry Glenn more props because he was a walk on, and I take away points from Chris Carter because he kind of left in a little bit of a disgraceful manner. Does that make sense? Like, does Terry Glenn get any additional
Well,
points
are
because he was
we?
a walk
Yeah,
on?
no. I mean, I guess I was just talking about pure wide receiver athletic ability.
That's
Like,
fair. That's
so
fair.
I
Yeah.
totally hear what you're saying. And I think Chris Carter has made amends for what he's done. I mean, he's
Well,
certainly
yeah, for
talked about
sure.
it openly. You know what I mean? So I don't
Yeah.
I don't hold things like that against people as much as like there was a while there, like for example, Maurice Claret. When he was did the ESPN article and all that stuff. Like, people were like, "Yeah, you won us a national championship, but I'm not sure we're claiming you." And then he kind of turned
Okay.
his life around, and now I think people look at him in a whole different light now, right?
Yeah,
So
I am not bashing Chris Carter by any means.
yeah. No, I
Trust
guess I
me.
was just saying what
Yeah,
I was looking at my rationale, just like what I saw,
and if
what
you're
I
talking
saw
about
each of them do.
NFL
And
players,
Terry Glenn, man, hey, listen, one
smooth.
A, one B. I mean,
Yeah.
you're splitting hairs when you're talking about them. So I wouldn't have like, no, I'll fight you over this, who's one and who's two. But I would put Chris Carter just a little bit ahead.
And don't you
But no, I
feel that
agree with what you're saying there with Glenn as well.
in that second? I feel like David Boston kind of sits alone on that second tier, don't you think? Or are there other guys that? Because you mentioned, do you think, because you mentioned Michael Jenkins? Michael Jenkins, I agree with you 100% that he's underrated in the fact that people don't mention him, and he should be mentioned, because if Michael Jenkins was in today's offense, it would be absolutely disgusting. It would be absolutely
Right.
disgusting. And I feel like people forget about him too, because his NFL career was a little lackluster, but he was still in the NFL for quite a while. And like you said, he had his highlight reel. He has those splash plays. It was kind of like, I feel like Antonio Holmes is kind of in the same light, because people don't, because he didn't have the most productive career. But man, when you watch his highlight tape, you're like, oh God, that guy was smooth. Like those were critical plays. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's like I feel like you can go back through Ohio State's history, from the late '80s on. I feel like what has changed, Ohio State they've always had at least one receiver, right? That it was just like you're looking at them and you're going, okay, that's a guy you got to cover, right? I mean,
Yeah,
he can open a game wide open.
that's fair.
Um, you get into these last 4 years, 5 years, and you go, who we guarding? Who we putting our best dude on? Because you put him on Chris Olave, well, you got Garrett Wilson. Put him on Garrett Wilson, you got Smith and Jigba. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
so
well,
that's where
Forrest
I think
Gump,
like you're
Johnny Dick.
going. Yeah, that's where you're kind
Mhm.
of getting into the, you know, you had said earlier, like I think it's turning into wide receiver you. Like
Yeah,
you can't guard it. You can't guard all of those guys right now. Um, so yeah, even though he, well, Chris Gamble, I think on that 2002 team as well, I think he was fairly underrated. He did obviously both ways there.
you think
Um,
he's underrated? I feel like people, you.
as a
I feel like
receiver,
oh, okay, I could see that. That's fair.
yeah, I just think as a receiver,
But as
what
an
he did,
overall
overall
legend,
player
I
for
feel like
sure,
people,
but just
yeah, I
as
feel
a
like people.
receiver, um, I think he was better than what a lot of people thought. Man, who else?
Well, I made fun of it, but Doug Donnelly, I mean, he was he was faster than Tony Dorsett, and he did have a bunch of records, and that was kind of, I feel like if you really talk about the 80s, like the passing offense, he was kind of the first receiver to be someone that they tried to throw the ball to on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Like he was a second round draft pick for the Cowboys. I don't know if he's obviously not up there in that first tier, but if you talk about production standpoint and all that, and maybe someone who changed the game a little bit for Ohio State, because if you look back before him, who's a wide receiver that comes to mind? Paul Warfield, who played running back. He was kind of the first wide receiver to really kind of do anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I hear you. I think that's a valid argument for sure.
I think Paris Campbell gets enough credit because his NFL career has been a little bit lackluster, and Terry McLaurin's NFL career is kind of. I think people forget that Paris Campbell was the dude on that team because Terry McLaurin's so good now that they're like, oh, Terry McLaurin was on that team. It's like, well,
KJ Hill was on that team. He hit a record for most receptions, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Again, that's that recent history, but yeah, Paris was so fun to watch just because he was just so smooth. Like he looked like he was moving, in slow motion.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was just moving so fluidly. So maybe everybody else was looking like they were moving in slow motion. He's just gliding wherever he was going. So,
and it's hard to process where you rank that too, because he got a. So when you talk about pure receivers like Chris Carter, Terry Glenn, those guys would go downfield. Those guys were intermediate route runners. Talk about Paris Campbell, you got to kind of enter the fact where it's like, well, they manufacture. You got screenplays, you got reverses and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to.
Well, and that's where
it's hard to really rank them because there's so many different styles and vibes.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's where you just said where Teddy Ginn comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
we talked about that before the show started. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he would, he'd get down the field, and Troy Smith dropping it in his lap there. I mean, or you just throw it underneath. I mean, you remember was it the bowl game, Alamo Bowl, Oklahoma State? I mean, he played quarterback.
That's right.
Did he play quarterback? I feel like there were a couple times he got the ball.
I think it was that game because Troy Smith was hurt and Zwick started the game, but he got hurt too, right?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that. But I just know there's so many plays in my mind where it comes like you hit Ted Ginn on a quick slant, and then all of a sudden he just makes everybody look like cartoon characters running into each other, and So,
well, it's one of the few times in Ohio State history too where you watch and you're like, dude, he could take this home. Like when he would return punts, you'd be like, this might be a touchdown. Like every time when he was returning punts, this might be a touchdown. And you don't, that's a rarity, right? That's an extreme, right? You don't expect that, but still that should be noted that that's insane that you had that much confidence in a player where it's like that's the guy, give him the ball. But
right.
Antonio Holmes is we talked about him briefly before the show. We talked about I mentioned him earlier, but that's another guy when you look back at his highlight tape, he wasn't super productive, but you watch he was like the master of the hook, and he did that like 2 years in a row where it was just like, okay, we need yards. Let's send Santonio out on a 6-yard hook, and he would just turn around and be there and get a couple extra yards. I think he's kind of underrated. Curtis Samuel, I don't think he gets enough credit. I classify him in the category you talked about with Chris Gamble, where it's like he did so many things. No one really. He kind of gets lost in the sauce when you're ranking because he did so many things. No one else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Exactly. That's exactly what you're saying. Yeah, I was trying to think through those. I know Glenn was 95. Who was those mid-90s, late 90s teams?
So you
had that 98 team was so good.
D. Miller was on that team.
Was that D. Miller? Who was that? Was that Demetrius Stanley too? No,
Demetrius Stanley was in 97. Because he won the rule. He was a part of the Rose Bowl team. Yeah. It was him and it was Buster Tillman.
So David Boston would have been in those late 90s teams as well. Then.
Yeah. His last year was 98.
Yeah.
So
98. Because that 98 team. I mean, you lose to Michigan State late, but I think. Who was it? Tennessee and Florida State played for the national championship that year. Tennessee won.
That sounds right. Because T. Martin.
Yeah, it was T. Martin. Yeah, I remember watching that game, going, man.
Yeah, that sounds
State
right.
Would roll both of these teams.
Yeah.
Because they beat Texas A&M in the Sugar Bowl that year.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of you mentioned the 90s receivers. There's a lot of those guys that don't quite hit that tier, but they were really good. Chris Sanders was another guy that was very productive. You go back and you watch any of those 90s games and you'll be like, God, that guy's good. Who's that? Oh, Chris Sanders. I forget. He's one of those guys.
Tippy toes, right?
Kenyan Rambo. So there's some highlights of him where it's like, God,
dancing on the W at Wisconsin after they beat Wisconsin. That's what I remember most about Kenyan Rambo.
Yeah, because he wasn't super productive and he really wasn't good. He was just super fast. And it's funny too, because you can go watch his highlights in the CFL too. And that guy was amazing. It was like he was just a little bit more nuances around. Reggie Germany was also a pretty solid receiver. And those early 2000s, late 90s.
Oh, early 2000s. I mean, you start talking about Hartline, Robisky.
Yeah, I forgot. They don't even.
Sanzenbacher.
Yeah, Sanzenbacher was extremely productive. People forget how productive that guy was because he was just, an unathletic white guy. But he was extremely.
They had a whole slew of those guys from like 2003 to 2008, DeVere Posey.
DeVere Posey. Yeah, because DeVere Posey was on his way to break some serious records before the Tattoo Gate. That's another guy who was I forgot about. Devin Smith, and you talk about DeVere, guys that were kind of were drafted pretty high that didn't really have, the numbers you see, Terry Glenn and all that. Devin Smith was another guy that was I think is probably underrated when you look at the history of Ohio State because for what he did with that season. If we talk about older guys again, a guy I wrote down was Jeff Graham. Jeff Graham was extremely productive. But he got hurt. That's a guy who got hurt his last year there because Bobby Olive was actually the leading receiver 1989.
So, it's late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. No, you're right, 1990. Because I think I got Jeff Graham 1991 rookie card. So I think you're right. But he got hurt that last year, but he was extremely productive. I think he was a captain and had numerous records before he got hurt, I believe. Gonzo, we talked about Teddy again, but Gonzalez was damn good too.
Oh man, yeah.
There's a lot of them, man. There's a lot.
I know. I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's kind.
you talk about like the Anthony Gonzalez and Teddy Ginn, like, maybe I'm Mr. Optimistic, maybe I'm, but I still think if Ted Ginn doesn't get hurt on that opening kickoff return against Florida, it's a totally different game because you had to move Anthony Gonzalez outside.
Do people argue with that? Do people argue with that? You said it like that was a hot take. I feel like. It's like the sixth pick of the draft.
I'm sure people in Florida would engage.
Oh yeah, that's
fair. That, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It feels like a pretty bold statement to me when you lose 42-14. I mean, like, is he good enough to make up that many points? I mean, I just think it's a different game, right? Your game plan has totally changed when he was not in the lineup.
Yeah, he was not on the field. Roy Hall was a hell of a third receiver too. He was a hell of a third receiver, but when you made him be number 2, it was like, because that offense was designed on speed too. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And Roy Hall wasn't fast. He was just your possession, your possession third guy that would go over the middle. Was it Hartsock was the tight end too?
No, Hartsock was 02.
So he was.
He was on that 02 team.
Was he really? Oh, yeah. He's not old. Who was the tight end then? Because I feel like there was a tight end that was decent.
What year was that? 06?
Yeah, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I.
That wasn't the Ryan Hamby years, was it?
It might have been. You might
He's
be.
The one, I mean, he dropped the touchdown. He dropped the touchdown pass to Texas in 05 and got the death threats.
Yes, and I would not mention him in the same breath as Ben Hartsock, so I was wrong.
Okay.
I mean, right? I'm not trying.
I can't remember if that's him or not. I can't remember if that was.
Oh, for sure, because those were the years that Troy Smith was playing again when they played against Texas, right? And Vince Young.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm just saying I can't remember if he was done in 05 and then they moved on to somebody else in 06. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting though. A lot of good guys. No, there's a lot of wide receivers that were highly recruited guys that didn't pan out either. I know that Devin Jordan's on the coaching staff right now. That was a guy that was supposed to be hot shit from Cleveland Glenville. You remember Lamar Thomas or Thomas Lamar, whatever it was, that transferred to New Mexico, and everybody was like, "Oh no, he left," and he ended up not being very good down there either. I know that there's more. They're not coming to mind. Ray Small was another 4 or 5 star recruit that didn't really do much. I feel like a lot of those guys were from Glenville. Glenville had a rash of. There was like a portion of Ohio State history where everybody we got from Glenville was great, like Troy Smith and like Dante Whitner and Ted Ginn. And then it was like, okay, we got to get away from Glenville. And then it was like Ray Small and Robert Rose. It was like, oh, not everybody from Glenville is a first-round draft pick. That's interesting.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it kind of cooled off from there. But I think we're coming on the 40-minute mark. I told you I'd get you out of here before 30. I appreciate you coming on. This was cool talking ball. Hopefully we can have you back on. Hopefully you'll be willing to come back on. We can have Phil on and kind of go round and round on some more positions. This was fun just talking.
Yeah, man.
I can talk old school wide. I could talk wide receivers with you all day.
Yeah.
Imagine if this podcast was about running backs, we'd be screwed. We'd have to spend the night here.
Oh, let's do it again. I'll gladly jump in on that. So.
Yeah. So, and can you tell everybody where they can? Well, my 3 listeners, can you tell them where they can follow you on Twitter and all that good stuff?
Yeah, Mark Russell 1975. So that's it at Mark Russell 1975. I got in the Twitter game late, so everything was all the good names were taken. So,
well, I appreciate you coming on. You can catch Mark's work at Buckeyes Wire, just like me. Mark is always usually the first one on. If Phil doesn't get it, Mark usually snags it when it comes to the recruits top 5. I think you had an article recently about basketball transfers and coming in and out. You were the first one on the site to talk about Parker Lewis coming in from USC. So when it comes to breaking news, you're usually if Phil doesn't snag it, you're usually the first on the block. So if you want more information like that, definitely check us out on Buckeyes Wire. I'm Josh Keatley. You can follow me on Twitter at JoshKeatley16, and this is the Ohio State of Mind. Please give us a like, listen, follow. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, all that good stuff. And we are out.